For a brief moment in time, between 1536 and 1538, a plan existed to join in marriage Mary Tudor, daughter of Henry VIII, King of England, and Infante Louis, second son of Manuel, King of Portugal. Forgotten by most, it's no surprise that this marriage project is rarely mentioned today. After all, it was just a plan that never became a reality. Nevertheless, its tumultuous history, filled with highs and lows, mirrored the tensions present at that moment in Europe, mainly born from the rivalry between Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, and Francis I, King of France. This union was one of the cornerstones of the politics of Charles V against his rival, and at some point even included a marriage between Henry VIII himself and Charles's niece, Maria, Infanta of Portugal. So on this video, I'm going to try to understand the origins and potential of this marriage, as well as the reasons why it never happened. Before we start, don't forget to like and subscribe. In 1536, Charles V and his armies conquered the African city of Tunis in modern-day Tunisia. This event was the high point of his military career and his most celebrated victory, further cementing Charles's image as a modern Roman emperor, an ideal particularly appreciated and meaningful in the Renaissance. Amongst the many Christian lords and generals who took part in this victory was his cousin and brother-in-law, Louis, Infante of Portugal. The Portuguese prince stood out from the combat and became one of the heroes of the expedition, famous and respected throughout Europe for his military capacities and bravery. Louis was born in March of 1506. He was the fourth child and the second son of the kings of Portugal, Manuel, and his second wife, Maria of Castile, daughter of the Catholic kings. Little is known about his childhood, but it's fair to say that it followed the traditional path of a male aristocrat, first raised in his mother's household, and, after completing 7 or 8 years old, educated by men, who transmitted him all the necessary skills a prince would need. Later in life, his patronage of the arts and great culture were the symptoms of a solid education in his youth. He is described as far more brilliant than his elder brother, John, the future King of Portugal. In fact, Louis seemed to have all the capacities of a king, except the crown. Like his brothers Ferdinand, Duke of Guarda, and Edward, Duke of Guimarães, Louis was given the title of Duke of Beja, a title that once belonged to his paternal grandfather. His two other brothers, Afonso and Henry, were given ecclesiastical careers, with high positions inside the church. Damião de Góis, the chronicler of King Manuel and someone who had a close contact with Louis in the Portuguese court for many years, described him as a man of medium stature, with light hair and good looking, gallant, cheerful and brave. Morally, the chronicler highlights Louis's virtuous behavior, always ready to serve the crown with great honor and pride. But it's important to note that, although the description made by Damião de Góis is probably very accurate, it was still his task to sing the praises of the Portuguese royal family, presenting them as virtuous role models with an immaculate morality for posterity. Because of this, Damião decided to left out the other side of Louis. He was a complex and dynamic character, possibly the most interesting member of the Portuguese royal family at this time. Louis was bold and adventurous. He knew his brother wouldn't let him accompany their brother-in-law, Charles V, to North Africa, so Louis left in secret and without his brother's permission. Many historians point to the ambiguous relationship between John and his brother, some alluding to the possible envy that John, aware of its own fragile capacities, had towards his captivating and brilliant brother, so close to the throne. On the other hand, although Louis was blessed with such impressive qualities, he still had to bear the burden of being the eternal number 2 during his entire life and a victim of the system in which he was born. Before his father's death in 1521, Louis already held the title of Constable of Portugal, and after his brother assumed the throne, he also became the chief defender of the south border of the kingdom. In 1527, he was given the title of Governor of the Portuguese branch of the Military Order of the Hospital. But besides his active military career, Louis was also given important diplomatic missions, and he held great influence in his brother's court. But it's quite clear that Louis' ambitioned much more than this. Louis's sister, the Empress Isabel, maintained a close connection to her siblings, even after her marriage and move to Spain. Louis visited his sister at her new court several times, and he and his brother-in-law Charles developed a close friendship. This is why after his victory in Tunis, Charles V thought about giving Louis, an ally and a man he trusted, the Duchy of Milan, recently subtracted to the French by Charles. It's also at this point that the marriage project between Louis and Mary Tudor appeared in the mind of the emperor. This marriage project can only be explained at the light of the ferocious disputes between Charles V and Francis I of France in the European political and military stage. In 1536, Francis I made an alliance with the Ottoman Empire, the long-term exterior threat to European unity. As a result, and to cement his dominance over Europe, Charles V proposed a marriage between Louis, the brother of the King of Portugal, and Mary Tudor, the daughter of the King of England. The emperor's goal was to create a cluster of kingdoms under his influence against France and its king. By making this new couple the Dukes of Milan, he would also strengthen his authority in the Italian peninsula. Francis would be surrounded by pro-Habsburg rulers in almost every front. On his side, Francis, aware of the plans of the emperor, proposed a marriage between Mary Tudor and his own son, the Duke of Orleans. Both Charles V and Francis I were trying to bring Henry VIII to their side, waving at him with prestigious marriages for his eldest daughter. This was particularly tempting, especially considering Mary Tudor's delicate position in the English court after her father repudiated her mother, Catherine of Aragon. For someone that was considered by some an illegitimate child, Mary Tudor's value in the marital market was rising. The marriage between Louis and Mary was proposed by Charles V via his ambassador in London on the 28th of March of 1536. In Charles V's letter, he described how Louis accompanied him in the conquest of Tunis, his bravery and his virtues, and for those reasons he deserved to assume a ruling role, with Charles V hinting at the possibility of making Louis the Duke of Milan. Henry was tempted. After her marriage with the Portuguese prince, and if Charles kept his word, Mary Tudor could become the Duchess of Milan, a strategic key territory to control Italy. This would allow for a higher English influence in Europe, with Henry VIII using his daughter to defend the interests of London in that key state for European politics. Henry probably also had in account the delicate health of the children of the King of Portugal. In the eventuality of John III dying without an heir, Louis was the next in line for the Portuguese crown, and Mary would be the consort queen of the vast Portuguese empire. In either situation, Henry VIII would always profit. He only had to choose between Charles and Francis. The Portuguese formal proposal for the Anglo-Portuguese marriage only arrived in London in March of 1537, a year after the emperor's first letter. This was because this marriage project was not received by the Portuguese court with great enthusiasm. Later on, John III even complained that the dowry that Henry VIII offered for Mary was too small. Charles V had to go to great lengths to convince the Portuguese king of the match, but even after the Portuguese proposal was presented in London, John III wasn't completely on board. John III was a master of dissimulation. He possibly had no real intentions of letting his brother marry the English princess. This is especially true when Charles V proposed a marriage between Henry VIII and his Portuguese niece, the Infanta Maria, the half-sister of John III. Maria was the daughter of King Manuel of Portugal and his third wife, Eleanor of Habsburg, Charles's sister. After the death of her husband, Eleanor was forced to leave her daughter in Portugal and return to Spain, later marrying the King of France. Maria was known in her time as the wealthiest princess in Europe. Whoever married her would receive a gigantic dowry in return. Throughout her life, Maria was promised in marriage to the most important rulers in Europe, becoming known in Portugal as the Eternal Bride. At this point, there were some negotiations in the air for her marriage with one of the sons of Francis I, who was very interested in the financial gains from this union. Charles was naturally against this, as his niece's dowry could be used by the French king to finance his armies against Charles. This double marriage is first documented in May of 1536, but on the other side of the Channel, this month was one of the most chaotic in the reign of Henry VIII. On the 19th, Henry had his second wife, Anne Boleyn, executed in the Tower of London, and before the end of the month he was already married to Jane Seymour. Jane gave birth to their son, Edward, on the 12th of October of 1537, dying some days later. The door was again opened to the Portuguese marriage, and this time Henry VIII was the one who took the initiative. But the truth is that John III, now willing to accept his brother's marriage with the English princess, never had any real intention of letting his sister marry Henry VIII, or anyone for that matter. Her marriage would mean a great loss of money for his kingdom. His argument was that he couldn't let a sister of his marry Henry of England because of his estranged relationship with the Holy See. On the 6th of June of 1537, Lord Cromwell wrote to Sir Thomas Wyatt informing him that Henry VIII was favourable to this match. But in other letters, Cromwell complains that the imperial ambassadors seem to have lost any interest in the project. In fact, due to the volatile politics of Europe, Charles V had now no interest in the project that just some time before he was so invested in, much more than the Portuguese and the English sides. Charles V and Francis I were now in talks for a meeting between the two rulers. This was bad news for Henry VIII. It was of his interest to maintain the animosity between Spain and France. He wanted to use these marriage negotiations to pressure both sides. If peace between France and the Empire became a reality, Henry would see his influence reduced in Europe. It's interesting to note that, although Henry wanted to keep the marriage negotiations with Portugal and France alive as a way of keeping the rivalry between Charles V and Francis I, he was still reluctant to choose a side. Henry was playing a dangerous game, pushing negotiations on both sides to the limit. With the Conference of Nice between Charles and Francis I in 1538, Henry realized he had lost the game. He was especially furious with Francis, who turned on him and chose peace with the emperor. Henry VIII had nothing to lose, but still believing he could make his daughter Mary Duchess of Milan, he tried to continue the negotiations, but it was too late. The peace between Charles and Francis dictated the death of the Anglo-Portuguese marriage alliance project. It's interesting to analyze the hypothetical possibilities of the marriage between Louis and Mary, even if it's only a speculative exercise, as this match never became a reality. The age gap between Louis and Mary was of 10 years. When negotiations started in 1536, he was 30 years old and she was 20. Considering the age gaps between other royal couples of their time, 10 years is not a significant age difference. Besides, both had already reached adulthood at this point. The most natural was for Mary to leave England and join her husband in Portugal. Most likely, even if later they became Dukes of Milan, she would move to the court of Lisbon immediately after their marriage. Although she would have to abandon her native country, as a princess, she was raised with that possibility in mind. On top of that, even if Mary had no contact with Portugal, Lisbon wouldn't be completely strange to her. The Portuguese royal family was also her family. John III and Catherine of Austria, kings of Portugal, were both her first cousins. The same thing with the siblings of the king, including Louis. Besides moving to a Catholic kingdom, which must have been of some comfort to her, Mary wasn't completely foreign to Iberian culture and habits, as she was exposed to them during her childhood with her mother, Catherine of Aragon. By marrying Louis, Mary would become a Portuguese Infanta and the Duchess of Beja, one of the wealthiest aristocratic houses in Portugal, and assume an elevated position in the court of Lisbon, taking part of its opulent and exotic lifestyle. Mary would be surrounded by women that shared some of her values and ideals, like the unshakable pride of descending from the Catholic kings and the Catholic faith. Women like Catherine, Queen of Portugal, her daughter Maria Manuela, and the Infanta Maria, the sister of the king, as well as Isabel of Braganza, the wife of Edward, one of Louis's brothers and the one closer in age to Mary. But most interestingly, if Mary and Louis had a child and he managed to survive until the eve of the Iberian Union in 1581, that child would be the heir of the Portuguese throne, and history would have been very different. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.